The information provided on this podcast is for general information purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your qualified health provider with any questions you may have. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. Reliance on any information provided here is solely at your own risk.
Welcome. This is Birth, baby. Your hosts are Sierra Morgan and Samantha Kelly. Sierra is a birth doula, hypnobirthing educator, and pediatric sleep consultant.
Samantha is a birth doula, childbirth educator, and lactation counselor. Join us as we guide you through your options for your pregnancy, birth, and postpartum journey. Hello, everyone. Today we have with us Sabrina Ortolano. She is a birth doula who has been supporting families for nearly 30 years. She is also the owner of IPSB, Los Angeles' longest running bodywork school, where she's the head instructor for courses on prenatal massage and this history of birth in the United States. Sabrina's teaching emphasizes how to provide the best care and support for clients navigating major life transitions and milestones, with a particular focus on the birth experience and its various nuances. We are so excited to have you here today with us, Sabrina.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be a part of what you're doing here.
Yeah.
I love your podcast. It's very cool.
Oh, thank you. We're very excited to have you here today and talk about some really cool stuff, I think. We had a conversation a few weeks back, kind of talking about what we might want to talk about, and we all just got so excited, and it was so cool that there's so many different things that we can discuss today. So I'm excited to get into something that I've always been really interested in and kind of dive into that. So to start us off, we know that birth has changed quite a bit in the United States over, the decades, centuries, all of that. Can you give us kind of a brief rundown of what birth, kind of used to look like and kind of how it's changed over the course of the past century or so?
It's interesting. I think a lot about, I'm 51 this year, and my generation is like just on the edges of when things like twilight birth were common. And I think it's important to be aware of that, because the way that we've approached birth over time in our medical industry in particular can define how like some of the underlying currents of how our cultures function. So for those of you that don't know, twilight birth was the perspective that, like, we don't need to actually, like, we have anesthesia, we have all these great things, we don't need to suffer through birth, right? So what would happen in the like 60s, early 70s, and one of the reasons we had this like back to the earth movement and push against the medicalization of birth was twilight birth was really common. What would happen is the person who's pregnant would check into the hospital, they would get sedated, they would be undressed, tied with restraints to the bed, and they would basically have the medication they were given was the kind of medication that you would use for like brain surgery, where your body is still able to move and you can respond to things, but you don't remember anything. So you would sometimes be sedated for 3 or 4 days. You'd be lined up in rooms full of other people who were going through similar experiences. You would have your baby without any awareness of it happening. And then you'd wake up a few days later and someone would say, "This is your kid." And what we know now around how important things like that golden hour, that first hour after birth, and how it helps you bond to your child and recognize your child, and how it helps regulate the baby's breathing and heart rate and all of those things, like them being skin to skin contact is so necessary for them being a healthy baby, that not having that had really poor outcomes. Like, one of the reasons we don't do things like forceps birth anymore, it took unfortunately, a lot of studying. But it turns out that if you save the 10 minutes, which is about 10 to 15 minutes is all it saved, of grabbing onto the baby's head with like tongs, basically, and squeezing and pulling them out forcefully because the parent was sedated and couldn't push, it causes brain damage, and our instance of other neurological injuries is higher, right? It took an entire generation of people having all of these injuries for us to say, oh, maybe that's not a good idea. Right.
Yeah,
And if you think about, we have an entire generation of people who were born in twilight who have challenges with connecting with their parents, right? Think about this. So this is our boomer generation. A lot of them had birthed in twilight. So the initial connection, and we're also told only poor people breastfeed. We have bottled formula now. Why would you do that? Don't spoil your child. Don't hold them all the time because you're spoiling them. So all of the things we know now about attached parenting and bonding, and even just on a chemical basis, how our bodies react to our children and how we learn their language and how their nuances by holding them and being in that shared kind of chemical bond is so vital for a healthy relationship between parent and child that we sabotage that completely
right,
for an entire generation. And if you
right.
look at that like as an overarching thing, like I spent a lot of time thinking about this lately, from an overarching perspective, the differences in the way that the generations communicate and interact, like I'm Gen X. It's like, okay, yeah. So it's go outside and I don't want to see you until the lights come on, right? There's a lot of running jokes about that, but the lack of a desire to be close to your child is really indicative of the lack of a bond, right? And it's not that their parents were bad or wrong. I'm not saying any of those things. It's that culturally we know better, so we're trying to do a little better, right? However, there are other challenges involved in all of that. So each generation has a challenge, but what happened before informs what we're fighting with or struggling with now.
Yeah, I
And
tell people in the childbirth education classes that I teach, it's not that when we talk about, the myths and misunderstandings handed down through the ages of childbirth, that we think things are so scary, but when we find out the why, it's just that we didn't know better back then,
mhm,
and that is why the bad things were happening. And not because anyone was evil or mean. Well, I mean, sometimes,
yeah,
but
well,
generally,
yeah,
they thought they were helping. And so they were like, if this amount of intervention helps, let's add more because we're
mhm,
helping. And really, we were inadvertently making this divide between the parent and the child and this disconnect between
mhm,
what's happening with your body and your brain. And that is not to say that anyone was trying to be bad or mean. They were trying to save us from what they thought we
yeah,
needed to be
Yeah.
saved from, although we didn't all want to be saved. So,
Well, and it's kind of like an overcorrection too
yeah,
of like how bad things used to be. There used to be nothing anybody could ever do for any sort of pain or saving
mhm,
a baby who did need help coming out. So it used to be that there were no options, and then we all of a sudden got all these options, and they were like, "Oh, wait a minute. We have these now and everyone should have them." And it
yeah.
was almost like a novel thing, and so it's like the best cool thing out there, so we all want to do it.
Well, and if you think about it, the only positive thing that happens in a hospital is childbirth.
Right.
So of course, the desire to have a positive and like it's a human thing. I want to be a part of a good, happy thing, right? Of course, I want to be there during like the beginning of their life. But if the perspective is, like it's the old chestnut of like, okay, if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything is nailed, right? So if you are a medical provider where the only option you have is all of these interventions, because in every other instance, it is completely appropriate to shower these interventions because it helps save lives. Then of course your perspective is this is the most appropriate thing to do. Of course, because your underlying understanding of how the world works comes from the perspective of like interventions are good and appropriate. Birth is the only instance where we're in a quote unquote medical experience where less interventions are actually helpful. And it's a
Right.
weird thing. It's a complete paradigm shift. And it's not a normal thing for a medical provider. And especially in our culture, we really are like, I think that my wife had cancer and I am so grateful for all of the care providers, but I also have a really clear understanding that like medical advocacy is very important. And
Hmm.
there is definitely a culture in American medicine of like the white coat is God and you should not question. And I think that you shouldn't question out of fear. You should question out of education, but also like we're responsible for our care that way. And it is really hard to find a nuanced balance in that. And accept what's helpful and good, and what's also understand, like I want to opt out of what's not good for me.
I think that
Yeah.
our
So
clients have a hard time with that sometimes when we're speaking with them, or even our childbirth education participants that aren't even our clients. I find myself so often saying, I'm not saying OBs are evil. I'm not saying
mm-mm,
doctors are bad because every time I
no,
tell them things are done for provider preference versus medical necessity sometimes, or like you've got to be on your toes a little bit with this because they may want to do this, and that's just because it's more, easier for them, more convenient.
hmm
And then they think I'm saying that they take that as you're saying doctors are bad, blah, blah. No, I'm not. So it's you in any situation, you should know what's going on with your body
Yeah.
and
hmm
your experience and be able to ask questions without it being an offense. You're not questioning them, you're asking questions. And
exactly.
so the attitude behind it can just be from a place of understanding, wanting to understand. And I don't think that that was really a thing back when women were being or people were being put under twilight for these situations. There
Well, it
weren't
wasn't.
there wasn't information.
Well, if you think about it too, like I mean, I'm like I was born in 1973. That was the year Roe v. Wade went through. 71 was the first year that a woman could have a bank account without having a male relative sign for them, where like their actual name could be on a bank account. So, of course, there was no questioning. Okay, that was a culturally not a like we were not autonomous humans. And in the earlier earlier in my lifetime and earlier like 60s and 70s even up to then, the reality was because we were not separate autonomous creatures, we were children that needed to be cared for.
Right.
And also that was the whole cultural perspective. It's and however responsible we were for things, we were still like silly little children that needed to be cared for. We were hysterical. And so that there's a perspective around how we were spoken to and how we were interacted with. And also, I mean, really, it was the 70s before partners were allowed to be at a birth and see what was done to their partner. Okay, that's one of the things. Like twilight birth was part of what caused that uproar because, they would spouses would get their partners home with their child and they would be covered in bruises. And
Hmm.
they wanted to know why. Why can't I be there to see my child born? Why can't I be a part of that and support my partner? The idea that they're a team and they should be able to participate in this major life-changing event that affects both of them was a new concept. It was always, dad's out there in the waiting room with a cigar, like doing the hard work, right? Like we're just in here doing the girls' work, right? And this whole cultural concept of the like, there's a complete separation and they shouldn't see these dirty things because we have to stay pretty. This whole thing was just it's a disadvantage for both partners because the ability to rely on each other and trust each other and support each other is so much stronger when you have been through something that is so profoundly life-changing together, knowing
And
that
it
you can lean on each
is.
other.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It
it makes the
really
relationship
is.
stronger.
Yeah, I
So
think I think that it's so hard to e- even just get that point across to people when when we're educating and meeting with our clients of like it's hard to explain how profound that moment is until you
mhm,
have experienced it, how life-changing it is, not just to see your partner do this amazing, powerful, crazy thing that you could never do, as a male, but also to watch life come into the world, watch your person become an entirely new person with the birth of this child. And I try to explain it sometimes, and I don't know how. It really is just so life changing, and I really think that everyone needs to have the experience of seeing that happen at least once in their lives, especially partners who do not get to give birth. Being able to
mhm,
see that and be a part of that is going to set you up for supporting your partner in the postpartum.
absolutely,
Yeah, that
absolutely.
that connection that turns on. If you think about back in the day, what it used to look like for partners that were not in the room, not even involved, and then you think about the dynamic at home. were the men or the other partner, were they helping rear the children, or were they really just the wait till your dad gets home and the dad's just off at work and the mom's at home caring for these seven children or whatever,
Mhm.
and it's like two separate ships passing in the night because really he wasn't so involved. And then you think as how we're evolving of we have some rock star partners as
Yeah.
birth partner,
Hmm.
like oh my gosh, sometimes I'm just
Yeah.
like blindsided with how great they are. And sometimes we still have partners that are fairly disconnected. But I
Mhm.
would say the tides have shifted quite a bit to where we
Hmm.
have ones that really
Yeah.
want to be involved. And then if you take that and then add when we have partners who want to help catch their baby and we're the
Hmm.
first ones
Yeah.
touching their
Love
baby,
that.
it's like an
So
even
great.
higher, even deeper connection. I went to a birth. Dad didn't necessarily plan on catching, but he did. He wanted to receive his daughter, and they did. And he was like, I wouldn't have been able to do this in a regular hospital room, would I? And I was like, no, they wouldn't have, no. And he was like, I can't
Yeah.
imagine not being the one to have done that. And then I went to their postpartum follow-up, and the mom was laughing. She's like, when I feed her, I get her. Otherwise, she's skin to skin with daddy. Right there. You see that? And he's just on the bed with her on his chest. And he's like,
Aw.
what? We're just having our moment, you know? And it's like that ownership
Yeah.
of I am now part of this equation, and it's not just like the default parent of the mom and she's going to take care of the house and do all the things. It's like he's changing the diapers. So it might seem so simple, like, oh,
Hmm.
it's just the birth. No, he's the birth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It makes such a difference. And it's also I was at a birth on Monday and like watching how they depend on each other. I think this is one of those things like as a doula, like learning to be responsible for like stepping back and helping them foster their relationship
Hmm.
and not trying to like swoop in and be the hero in that. You get this moment where I'm like, oh God, I feel like I've leveled up as a doula because I'm like, okay, so like there's a huge height difference. And she's more comfortable with my height because I'm shorter than you. Like, let's get you on a stool so she can lean on you, right?
Hmm.
Because he was like, he was hurt because
Yeah.
she wanted to lean on me because I was shorter. And she couldn't express it. She's just uncomfortable, right? And she's just
Yeah.
like, no, I need her because she's shorter. And he was just so like there was this moment I watched him like his feelings just go, and I was like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm like, why don't you sit on a stool? And I'm like, I'm just gonna sit on the couch and you guys do your thing. And he felt so like engaged. It was so beautiful that he had the answer. I was like, let me explain what I'm doing on her back. Let me explain how to do this with the idea of like, let me help you be the person that she needs in this moment is so cool.
It really
And
is.
getting to see them, like we just did a postpartum visit and getting to see them and like how he's like really engaged with making sure she's eating and she's comfortable and she has all the stuff and like that personal responsibility and that level of partnership is so beautiful. And it means
Yeah.
that they're better equipped to support each other,
I love that
It's
so
just
Yeah.
much.
such a
That's
cool
such
thing.
it is. And you're right. It not only filters in their care for their child, it filters into their care for their partner because
Mhm.
and that starts in pregnancy.
Yeah.
Are they really making little changes to their life that you're also having to make just because you're the pregnant one? Like, are they doing those things with you?
Mhm.
Um, that's really nice to feel like you have that kind of camaraderie, like somebody else is on my team and doing these things with me. Or
Yeah.
I know you don't have to breathe, but let's practice breathing techniques so that you know what they're going through and you
Hmm.
know how to help coach them before I'm there, or
Hmm.
whatever. Or you're the one in the moment that's coaching them. And then that filters into the birth. And then that filters into postpartum with the baby, but also with taking care of the partner again, with the feeding, like you're saying, and all of that. And I think that's such a great transition into our next question, which is like, what's been the evolution of the village? Or I feel like
Oh,
maybe a devolving of the village, and maybe it's not an
I agree.
evolution. You want to touch on that a little bit, like where we've
Yeah.
been, where we went to, now where we're going?
So, it's interesting because I was just having a meeting yesterday with one of the people I work with at our school, and like, because we're launching our new program next year, and we're talking about like how can we support the community more, and like what free workshops can we do to like help the people who are like, my friend's having a baby, what do I do? Like, how do we do stuff like that, right? Because the reality is like American individualism is not helpful for the family at all. It just isolates you and makes you feel like you're a failure because you can't keep up with your life. And the first year postpartum is not something any one person can keep up with. It's not something any two people can keep up with, frankly, especially if you have to earn a living and or, as in the US, which is just insane to me, go back to work 6 weeks after having a baby. It's ridiculous. Like if you had major abdominal surgery,
Absurd.
you major abdominal surgery, you have any sort of major surgery, 6 weeks, like you're still on partial duty, you can barely do anything. But you have a baby where like you've had a major body event and also are responsible for caring for another human. Oh, go get out there. Like it's
Hmm.
crazy.
And
It's
when you have
insane.
a knee surgery, no one's waking you up every 2 hours to feed somebody else in the middle of the night
Oh
either.
my God,
Uh-huh.
I had my knee replaced and I'm like 3 months of like, don't even talk to me. I can't. I was on
Yeah.
disability for 3 months because I could not function. And it's similar, but no, we just expect you to bounce back and be normal, quote unquote. It's insane. And the thing that's challenging about this is we have the, I mean, I feel like social media is no one's friend that way. Um, but the level of privilege involved in being able to afford all of the support. Like I had a client at one point who like she hired me for her prenatal doula or birth doula. And like I saw her every week before doing massage. So I got to know her really well. But she's an extraordinary amount of privilege. I'm in Los Angeles. There's a lot of money here. And there's also contrasting a complete contrast in the like resource categories. And for
Hmm.
her in particular, like she had a housekeeper, she had a postpartum doula, she had a night nurse, she had all of this support that was there, and she had an extraordinary recovery. She
Hmm.
slept when she wanted to sleep if she was tired. She had someone making food for her, and the house was cared for, and someone helped care for the baby and made sure that she was successful at breastfeeding and had all of the resources she needed. And she was, and that's beautiful. And I love that she had that. But it really highlighted for me how few people have that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like these days, instead of having your village, especially in the United States, it's you have to
Hmm.
pay for your village.
Yes.
And if you
Right.
can't pay for a village, you don't get one. And I hope you
Right.
know your
Hmm.
neighbors and they might sign you up for a meal train. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
it's very few and far between, very rare to have people who know. And I know we're spoiler alert, we're gonna have 2 episodes with Sabrina already. We were so excited about everything with her. We planned two right off the bat. We already have a third in mind, but we'll dive a little bit deeper into what that looks like. But in the grand scheme of things, we went from having people take care of people
Hmm.
to not really having that because everyone's working and we're busy in the hustle and bustle to now having to try to pay for it. And not everybody can pay for it. So then we see just families that don't make it and people
Yeah.
that are just run ragged and they're completely empty and their bodies aren't even able to heal because they can't sleep. They
Yeah.
can't do any of these things. And we talked to um, physical therapist, like a child physical therapist, and she was talking about how when we fix one thing, for example, having babies sleep on their back instead of their belly, well, we fixed one thing, we reduced SIDS, right? But then now we have flat spots on babies' heads, right? So it's like
Mhm.
you fix one thing and another thing breaks, and then you got to learn how to fix that thing to
Yeah.
deal with it. And it's kind of like when you take a medication and it has a side effect, so you have to take another medication to help with that side
Mhm.
effect. And it feels like that's what we're doing in our families is we're having to try to fix it, but even having people that are not in your actual village, if you're just paying for the village,
Yeah.
it's just not the same
It's
Nope.
very
because
different.
yeah, now it's a money exchange situation. It's not
Hmm.
just from the heart, although doulas we do this for heart work, but we
Oh
do
yeah.
have to get paid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's
We
just
also have
not
to
the
pay for our
same.
And
lives.
we don't have, I mean, for most of us, we're working on building personal connections with our clients, but like in the long run, like we're not your best friend. We want to be your birth best friend, but we're not your best friend. We don't
Right.
know all of the backstory, all of the things that make you you, and we don't
Hmm.
always know how to, support you in the way that's best without having some additional input. And I think like just of that idea of the village, like we're talking about like an actual village of people that used to support, pregnant women. They're used to you go into labor and all of the women came. Everybody was there.
Yeah.
And there was somebody there taking care of your older children and cooking for you and cleaning for you and helping, throughout your end of pregnancy and
Hmm.
birth and postpartum. And then we turned into, we went through like in the early 1900s, this phase of, no, like pregnancy is dirty, pregnancy is gross.
Yeah.
God forbid anyone has ever had sex and there's proof of it. And, and, and we don't ever talk about it. And women were expected to be knocked out at the hospital and not have anybody there to support them, and then come home to this alien that they birthed, that they don't remember birthing, that they were also
Yeah.
kind of ashamed of being pregnant with, but also excited for, because that's our sole purpose in life.
Yeah.
And we're solo. There's nobody. You can't ask
Yeah.
for help. Maybe your mom is there, but that's it. And now we're like kind of getting into this place where like we're starting to understand, yes, there's doulas. We can ask our friends for
Mhm.
help. There's a great app online called Meal Train. Everybody can sign up for it. We have
Yeah.
occupational therapists and all these things. And there's some, I think, advantages to that model, but I don't think it could ever replace the actual family taking care of you, people who know you, who love you, taking
Yeah.
care of you.
Well, and I have to say too, I think to some extent that can be idealized because like I have very challenging relationships with my family. Like if my
Hmm.
family showed up at my birth, that would be a problem,
Yeah, I
Right.
think
right?
we mean the
So,
family you make. That's your good
oh
point.
yeah,
Yes.
totally.
The
Yes.
family
And
you've
that and
chosen.
that's one of the things where I'm like, when I first started attending births, so I've been showing up at births now for almost 30 years. And part of the reason for that is because so many of my close circle were people that came in from different states. California is full of people who have moved from other states for various reasons. And so there's not this like infrastructure that's already there. And like you're very alone a lot of the time because you're just establishing your community. And so
Hmm.
when my friends started having babies, it was like, I don't know, like some of them, it was my partner's not safe. My partner's not someone I want to be around, or the sperm donor is not someone I ever want to talk to again. All of those things that happen that are challenging are
Yeah.
that how do you build that infrastructure and find people that you trust to do those things? And it's really hard.
Money is a situation there,
Mhm.
right? So people that are
Yeah,
going through those hard times and don't have people around for them, how do they pay for that, even in birth work, not even postpartum? Like, how do you
yeah,
pay somebody to be with you? And how do you find that person? And of course, with the internet, it's a lot easier these days and social
yeah.
media and that sort of thing. It does make it easier to find, but again, like that's a privilege to be able to
Hmm.
afford that. And luckily there are programs. Like here in Austin, we have one that's nobody should birth alone, and
Hmm.
people donate to that, and that is helpful, but it's still not the ideal situation of having that close
Hmm.
No,
village of friends and family or friends that you call family around you to do that.
in
Yeah.
California here, they just added doula care, so prenatal visits, birth and a postpartum visit to Medi-Cal, so that people who don't have the resource can still get some of the support they need, which I think is extraordinary because the birth
That's
outcomes are so
amazing.
low for Medi-Cal supported births a lot of the time. And I think that that's just so important. I'm really excited that they did that. I'm gonna be one of the things we're going to be offering in our postpartum and doula trainings is a workshop on how to sign yourself up to be a provider for Medi-Cal. So that
Hmm.
because like I donate time a lot of the time. Like I don't see a lot of births these days. It's more if you really want me to be there and I'm your person, I will show up. Okay, but I'm not doing it as my main source of income anymore
Hmm.
because I have so many other projects. So I'm like, okay, so when I'm there, it's because you really wanted me there, and we'll figure out like what it's going to cost. But I have a luxury to be able to do that. It's definitely like if when birth work was my main thing, I couldn't afford to pay my bills if I didn't have X number of births that paid X amount, right?
Right.
And it means that I didn't have the luxury to show up for people in the way that I really want to in that way. And I've created my life in a way that makes that make sense. But I'm lucky. I'm really lucky in that. And I know that. And it's one of the reasons that, we've had a lot of conversation. I know we talked about this a little bit when we met because we talked forever. Uh, because I enjoy you guys. Um, but part of the reason that I'm looking at establishing a massage doula training is to help doulas have more than one stream of revenue so that they
Hmm.
can have they don't burn out as quickly. It means that you have a little more access to money, and it means that your life can be a little more stable. So because I mean I'm like the years that I was doing this full time, I'm like I didn't come to my own birthday party. I missed all the holidays. I'm like
Hmm.
I was just like, oh, I'd love to do that, but I'm on call for a birth. and you
Yep.
can't leave your house. You have to have your kid with you all the time, all of these things. And it's like, it's beautiful and it's extraordinary, life-changing work. And I have no regrets. But I also recognize that for me, doing it full time was unsustainable. And that's
Yeah.
where we see a lot of people who get into it and they're so excited. And then they're like, this is just not sustainable because everyone else in my life is suffering.
Yeah.
And so looking for ways to make this accessible to more people so they have the support they need, and finding ways to make it possible for the practitioners to show up and thrive in this work, not sacrifice all the time. Because I feel like things that are birth related in particular are expected to have so much sacrifice around them
Yes.
that I just
Hmm.
think it's really unhealthy.
I
You know, we
agree.
have to
Hmm.
find ways to approach this from like, no, we shouldn't have to suffer all the time just because we want to have a family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it's
Yeah.
one of the reasons we see declining birth rates is because the expectation is if you have a baby, you're going to suffer and you're going to have less opportunity and less resources and all of those things. That's our
Your
American
career's going to suffer
perspective.
if you already had one. Like,
Exactly.
glad you worked on it, but
Exactly.
sorry, it's going to taper off here. And then you're going to have a
Good
big
luck with that.
gap. Yeah, you're going to have a big
Yeah.
gap on your resume. I was actually just talking to my 14-year-old about this. She was talking about what she wants to be when she grows up.
Hmm.
And I was like,
Hmm.
okay, but you have to think, do you want to have a family? Do you want to stay home with your kids? You have to think about whatever realm you get into. When that time comes and you decide you want to have children, then you might want to take 4 years off to be home with your kids before they start school. And if you do that, you're going to have a gap on your resume. And I'm sorry, but the real world situation is that for women who have a gap on their resume because of staying home, if somebody else applies for that job and they have more recent experience, they getting chosen, like
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
and my husband was like, Sierra, this is really far off. Like you're really getting into it
Like,
here. I was like, I don't care. She needs to
no.
know when she thinks about planning her future that this is something. And my husband goes, and we're not
Hmm.
watching your kids all day, by the way. Like, so I'll help.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so this is so helpful. And I think like we already told people, we have another episode coming up. So we
Mhm.
are going to bring Sabrina back to talk more about this village and the different groups and how this affects different people. But real quick, in case somebody doesn't listen to the next episode, can you tell people how to find you and what it is you're doing? You teased a little bit that you have this massage school. How do people find you online and learn more about what you're doing?
Okay, so the massage school is IPSB. So IPSB.com is our website, and my email is Sabrina@IPSB.com. It's very simple. We're in the process of moving into a new building. So next year, 2025, we'll be launching a whole bunch of programs and community mixers and events and things that are going to be happening. So, signing up for the newsletter there will get you on the mailing list to make sure that you hear about what's going on with everything. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's the best way to
Love it.
find us.
Love
Awesome.
it. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing all about all this. I think the history stuff is just so exciting. Someday I'm gonna have to do a whole series on it. I've been talking
Oh
about it
yeah.
since we started this podcast because I think it's just so interesting. And so I love that we get to start that conversation. But thank you
All
for
right.
coming on, and everybody
Thank you
tune
for having us.
in next week to hear more from Sabrina.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us on Birth, baby. Thanks again to Longing for Orpheus for our music. You can look him up on Spotify. Remember to leave a review, share, and follow wherever you get your podcasts. See you next week.